Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson Today. We are listening to Cold Case Files.
Some of us are lucky enough to meet our high school sweetheart and get married.
Tim and Kelly started dating in high school. Tim would bring Kelly out to the farm.
I thought it was kind of cool that a city girl would come and hang around with a farm boy.
They were a good couple. I really do believe that the two of them would eventually be married, that they would be a couple for life.
Tim and Kelly were going to go to a wedding reception at the Concord House.
Tim and Kelly get to the Concord House at approximately 10:30 p.m. They're there for approximately half an hour, 45 minutes. Witnesses say that Tim had a beer and Kelly had a soda during the time they were there, and there are witnesses that see them leave.
The next morning, get up and get work done. Except when he got up in the morning, Tim wasn't there. Instantly, there was a level of concern. If he wasn't going to come home, he's going to stay with a friend, he'd call.
We called Kelly's mom and said, did they stay there? She said no. I drove up to the Concord House to look. Tim's car was still there. The door wasn't quite shut, and his wallet was still in the car. And that was not like him to do stuff like that. From there on, we finally realized Tim and Kelly are gone.
The sheriff's department finds cigarettes, checkbook, wallet. There did not appear any sign of a struggle.
They were boyfriend and girlfriend. There was some talk, I remember, did they elope? Did they take a bus someplace?
Our kitchen actually became a command post.
Dave knows that something's wrong.
Something has happened. We need to figure out what happened. If they had run off to Las Vegas and got married, they would have called us. They wouldn't have let us sit and worry about them.
In the first 4 days, they were talking to all the employees from the Concord House. We're talking to wedding guests.
One consistent thing that was reported was that there was this dark, dirty van that had been in the parking lot. One witness specifically recalled the van taking off in a sort of a suspicious fashion, in a quick way.
The Concord House itself was right next to the interstate. There's a big parking lot. There's not a lot of lighting or anything out there. If you were intent on abducting somebody, all you had to do was wait for the right moment.
We need to find the kids.
The community stepped up. All the local farmers were there to help do some searches around the Concord House.
They're searching vacant buildings. They're searching everywhere that they can find.
Everybody was involved. This is one of the largest manhunts in the state of Wisconsin.
Didn't seem real. Nothing seemed real. You'd have two news helicopters landing in the field next to the house. I mean, how real is that?
We checked every place we could think of. There was nothing that could lead us to them.
A teenager on his tractor had seen something as he was driving that caught his eye. A pair of pants, just like Kelly had been wearing on the night that she disappeared. Both the left and the right leg are completely cut from the ankle all the way up to the waist. And so, in other words, the pants could have still been on her body, but they had been cut away.
It just magnified what I had thought all along, that someone had definitely raped her.
Over the course of 10 days, multiple pieces of clothing belonging to Kelly are found along the roadway within a 6-mile radius of the Concord house, as well as about a dozen pieces of rope with various knots tied in it.
We have very good evidence now, but we need Tim and Kelly.
Squirrel hunters from Milwaukee are out in the Ixonia, Wisconsin area, which is approximately 7 miles from the Concord house. While they're walking through a wooded area, they stumble across a body and immediately contact law enforcement. The body was badly decomposed. It's dark out, it's nighttime, so law enforcement sets up a perimeter around this area until daylight. Approximately 100 yards away, they locate a male body. It's fully clothed and appears to be the same clothing that Tim was reported to have been wearing on August 9th, 1980.
The manner of death for both of them was homicide.
I had the radio on, and they announced over the radio that they had indeed found both bodies. And so I remember walking in the kitchen, and the detective is there with my parents, telling them that they did indeed find Tim and Kelly.
There were ligature marks on Kelly's ankles and wrists that were consistent with having been bound. Kelly was most possibly strangled based on damage and insect activity around the throat area. So then these pieces of rope we're finding along the roadsides become extremely significant.
There's the regular square knot, but there's also half hitches, clove hitches, bowline knots. This is somebody with knowledge of knot tying, somebody that's been in the Navy or the military or in the trades, like a carpenter, maybe a painter. It's not going to just be your everyday person that's going to tie these types of knots. This is a tight-knit community, so the phone calls are coming in, the tips are coming in.
There's a tip that comes in from a woman who believes that her husband may have been involved in the murders of Tim and Kelly.
This suspect, Mr. James, lived in the area where the bodies were found. He does roofing work, works with ropes. He's known to carry a knife on his belt. He has a van. And on August 10th of 1980, shortly after the disappearance of Tim and Kelly, he has his wife and stepdaughters completely clean out the van. A lot of things are adding up here. This could be the guy that took Tim and Kelly. There were a lot of things that were adding up for Mr. James being our suspect. So a search warrant is obtained to search the property to try to see if they could find anything linking Mr. James to Tim Hack and Kelly Drew.
They retrieved clothing that is eerily similar to Kelly's shirt, both in terms of color and the way that it's torn.
They find ropes tied in knots. They find what could be blood.
They transport this clothing to the crime lab for testing.
As they're conducting a search, they received information from his wife. She said that he's an alcoholic, he's violent. He, according to his wife, had tied her up in the past, and that his wife said that her daughters, his stepdaughters, were being sexually assaulted by him. Officers took him into custody so that he could be questioned in regards to Tim and Kelly. He was questioned at length. He denied any involvement, and a polygraph or lie detector test was used on him.
Polygraphs aren't admissible at trial, but they do give investigators at least some guidance as to whether a suspect is being truthful.
He admits to the sexual assault of his stepdaughters, but denies any knowledge of Tim or Kelly, denies ever meeting them, abducting them, ever being at the Concord house.
It was the examiner's determination that Mr. James was being truthful when he denied having any involvement in Tim and Kelly's murders.
Mr. James ultimately is convicted of the sexual assault of his stepdaughters and sent away. However, he remains a suspect in this case.
I know that my parents and Kelly's parents worked together on planning the funerals. They died together. They wanted them to be together eternally.
Dave never let it go because Dave was always searching for justice for Tim.
You think it should be solved, you gotta blame somebody for looking at anything that was gonna help solve it.
Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole were a pair of drifters who were arrested on a number of very minor charges. After their apprehension, they started confessing to dozens and dozens of murders. As a result, detectives from all over the country now have to become involved in the investigation to see if any of their cold cases involved Lucas or Toole.
What led us to believe that they could be responsible was that they had abducted so many women and men, sexually assaulting them and at times killing them. There were a total of either 4 or 5 cases in Wisconsin at that time that were unsolved that could have been them.
A serial killer with a drifter lifestyle can leave a trail of bodies, and no one can actually pinpoint them to be in that location at any given time. One of the murders Henry Lee Lucas confessed to was the Orange Socks Drifter. This was a young Jane Doe, unidentified, who was found murdered wearing only orange socks. The Orange Socks Drifter was strangled and raped, very similar to the way Kelly Drew was. Because of the similarities in these crimes, this was a significant motivating factor for detectives to go interview Lucas and Toole.
There was optimism. Now it's getting serious. You just had that feeling that they were going to solve this case.
Lucas and Toole are confessing to in excess of 300 rapes and homicides that they've done across the country.
The reasons that Lucas and Toole might confess to all these crimes might be to gain attention. It might be important for them. Maybe it fed their egos.
Our investigator went to interview Lucas and Toole regarding Tim and Kelly. What led investigators to believe that they could be responsible for the murder of Tim and Kelly was that they had committed 2 separate homicides in Wisconsin. Lucas and Toole had previously admitted to being in Wisconsin, traveling on I-94, very close to where Tim and Kelly disappeared from at the Concord House. And the time frame was around the same time frame as Tim and Kelly's disappearance.
You know where this girl's at? I want you to admit to.
Right there, we're about 40 minutes at the station.
Oh, I know. But who's going to do it if we don't?
How many people did you kill?
150.
Investigators and the families believed that the murder had been found. And it was all that people could talk about was that finally we know who did it.
Investigators established a detailed timeline and find that Lucas and Toole were in Wisconsin in September and October of 1980. However, they were not in Wisconsin in August of 1980.
I mean, they certainly were killers, serial killers even, but they were not involved in Tim and Kelly's murders.
Tips aren't coming in. All the evidence that has been found has been processed, has been sent in. All the leads that have been developed have pretty much been followed up on.
The reality was we weren't making any progress towards identifying a suspect. Eventually the leads dry up and the case goes cold.
The case remains cold for more than 2 decades. The Hack family is forced to move on without their oldest son.
I sold the family farm. I always felt Tim would eventually take over the farm, but then after they died, it didn't really make any difference anymore because it was no longer a family farm.
You always expected Tim and Kelly to be there to run the farm, to run the crops. It just leaves a hole.
When I turned 18, my parents gave me Tim's car, and I still have the car, I still drive the car, I still love the car. I just didn't want Tim and Kelly forgotten.
A big part of my love for the community is that's where I grew up. That's where I'm raising my daughter now. Small towns are safe. You know, you can let your kids out at night and they can play without fear. I was 8 years old at the time Tim and Kelly went missing. So when I first was elected district attorney, I was well aware of this case. And I wanted to know what happened to Tim and Kelly.
When I got the case, it was 26 years old at that point. Knowing what a big case this was after being unsolved for so long, it immediately became my number one goal to solve this case. I reviewed thousands of pages of reports, attachments, maps, and photos, but in general, there's limited evidence I have to go with. But what I do have was Kelly's clothes. At that time, DNA is becoming more and more popular.
That was something that wasn't available to law enforcement back in 1980.
The clothing was submitted to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, and they told us that they did have DNA. The DNA located on Kelly's pants and underwear was from seminal fluid. So this was a huge break in the case. This is incredible.
I think for the first time in my life, I felt like there's a ray of hope here.
In looking at the maps, you could see where there were clearly 3 major roads that were used to dump the bodies and to dump the evidence. And so a triangle was established. At one point is where the majority of the evidence was found. At another point is the Concord house. And at the third corner would be the location where Tim and Kelly's bodies were found. So this was something somebody used to throw us off the track, or this person lives or is very familiar with this area.
Though he cannot know for sure, Garcia says his gut tells him someone local is responsible.
Media is a valuable tool for law enforcement to use. They have a huge audience, and they can get people to say something they normally wouldn't say, or maybe get people to feel that what they thought wasn't important is important. It had been a couple months since the news story ran, and one evening I received a phone call. There was a female who identifies herself as April. She explains to me that their family were basically drifters, that they lived in a lot of locations. In the summer of 1980, they lived in the Concord area within that triangle. She said, I think my dad could be responsible for Tim and Kelly. I think he killed them. April believes her father may be involved in the disappearance and killing of Tim and Kelly. And she said his name is Edward Wayne Edwards. She tells me about the book that he had written that she said would explain more about her father.
Will the real Ed Edwards please stand up?
Back in the early 70s. Edwards appears on numerous talk shows and game shows with this book about his life as a master criminal. In the late 60s, Edwards was on the FBI 10 Most Wanted list. He was a suspect in a double homicide in Portland, Oregon. They couldn't prove that he did it, but upon checking the criminal history of Edward Wayne Edwards, I see that he has been in prison. He has been convicted of numerous crimes to include robbery, vehicle theft, fraud, arson. He's done a lot of things.
And he goes on the circuit talking to people about what a horrible person he had been, but what a great person he had become.
I met a man who was a guard at the penitentiary, and he's the one that helped me to rehabilitate.
As I read the book, what was so interesting was he exhibited all of the classic signs of the stereotypical signs of a serial killer. He was a bedwetter. He had an affinity for starting fires. He was extremely controlling.
For some serial killers, the need to put on a normal face to interact with members of society and have access to victims is very important. In fact, if they looked unusual or weird or bizarre, they might not get to approach victims in the way that they need to.
life has certainly been anything but good. Dangerous, yes. Honest, no.
In addition to that, Edward's daughter, April, had told me her dad was in the military, that he had been dishonorably discharged from the military.
So Ed Edwards knows how to tie these knots. And his house is smack dab in the middle of where Kelly and Tim were last seen alive and where their bodies were ultimately located. This drifter, stranger who floated around, who wasn't really from Wisconsin. He wasn't from Jefferson County. We obviously have a new prime suspect.
I start going back through the reports and seeing if there's a mention of Edward Wayne Edwards. And I had him on my suspect list. Edwards was interviewed in early September of 1980. He really didn't have a lot of information to offer. He did not know anything about Tim or Kelly's disappearance. One thing that stuck out to me was that he had a broken nose. He said it was a deer hunting incident that caused the rifle to kick back and caused the broken nose that seemed odd to me. Gun deer hunting in Wisconsin is November, not in August. Once I found out where Edwards had lived, I talked to the landlord that took care of the house. He said that Edwards lived in that house for a brief time and then moved to another state shortly after the disappearance of Tim and Kelly.
They packed up in the middle of the night during the school year.
There are advantages to having a drifter-like lifestyle. You're not accountable for your whereabouts at any given time. You don't necessarily have people tracking you and keeping up on your location. For a serial killer, it's actually quite ideal.
The landlord also found some rope in the garage, and this rope was of similar characteristics to the rope that was found alongside the road. Edwards had a van. He kept a .357 revolver in the van. This van adds up with the van that was spotted that night. What was especially suspicious in 1980, Edward Wayne Edwards was a handyman at the Concord house. Everything was making sense. Everything was pointing towards Edwards. I think I know what happened to Tim and Kelly. Edwards was waiting in the parking lot. Kelly fit the profile he was looking for. Tim, being a strong farm boy, got a good swing in on Edwards, causing the broken nose. And that's when Tim was stabbed. There's no telling what happened in the van, but we know that Kelly was raped and strangled to death. I need to go to Louisville, Kentucky. I need to talk to Edwards, and I need to get his DNA.
If Ed Edwards truly was a psychopath, not having a conscience, not having empathy, not being afraid of punishment would have made it very easy for Edwards to kill again.
I was nervous. I realized what kind of person I was dealing with. There was a high probability that Edwards committed these crimes. He is a very, very dangerous person. This was it. I was surprised with his health condition. He was in a wheelchair, on oxygen. very overweight and not in very good health. Throughout the entire time that we spoke with him, he acted very nonchalant, like it didn't matter that we were there at all.
For some serial killers, it is a game. Given Edwards' age, it might have been this was his last opportunity to manipulate law enforcement.
When I asked him to provide a sample of his DNA so that we could test it, he said that he had no problem doing that. He thinks he's smarter than us. After 29 years, he's thinking, what DNA are we going to have? How are we going to prove this? Turns out it's a match. At the time we take him into custody,
We're just waiting on those guys. That's maybe come to your wife.
Edwards is acting as though this is no big deal.
Oh, okay, with my wife. That should be concerned. I'm joking.
No, they're not.
I'm joking.
I know you.
So one of the traits of a psychopath is this superficial charm that they can turn on and off at will in order to do their bidding.
Hey, thanks.
Bro.
They call you Cal. Is that what you told me? Kyle. Thank you.
Myself and the DCI agent speak with Edwards. I'm willing to make a statement and answer questions. I do not want a lawyer at this time. You agree with that?
Well, we'll go over them again if you're not comfortable. No, everything's fine. Everything's fine.
He waives his Miranda rights, and we explain a number of things showing that he is responsible for this. We're trying to get him to give us his version of events. This is your shot. I mean, this is your show. If there's anything you want to get off your chest, I'm yours. I'm here to listen to you. But unfortunately, this is your only shot. He completely denies ever killing anyone. You say that you didn't kill him. Okay?
That's right.
All right.
Never
All right.
anyone.
All right. I'm going to ask you this then. Who did it? Throughout the 8+ hours of interviewing with Edwards, he remained calm the entire time, and he frequently would try to change topics.
I use 2 shots of insulin a day.
He would talk about anything he could to stay away from talking about Tim and Kelly.
My mind is just a muddle.
His manipulating law enforcement in the interrogations is very consistent with who Ed Edwards is and had been his entire life. He lied, he manipulated, he conned.
You can continue. No, I know. I think this is just a game for you. And he's right. Your DNA was there. And that's the bottom line. Just you can see. You wait. You're not sorry.
He's lying to us, trying to beat us, thinking he's smarter than us. So I decide to feed into his ego. And I had his book with me. So if you wouldn't mind signing the book, you mind doing that for him? Oh, money. Well, how much a police officer, that doesn't mean money. And he did enjoy that.
I'm going to sign this as Wayne, okay?
Sure. During the final hour or two of the interview, we asked him if he could explain the seminal fluid DNA being on Kelly's clothes.
So then he comes up with the most unbelievable story.
Right, I had sex with her.
You had sex with the young lady who died?
Yes.
Okay, that explains a lot. Consensual?
With me? Yes. Oh, yes.
Not forcible, no.
Oh, no. It was consensual.
Tim and Kelly were joined at the hip. Kelly Drew's not going to go off and willingly have sex with Ed Edwards in a cornfield. But Edwards' defense attorney could have said it was consensual sex. We as prosecutors have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this is the person. And the DNA was really good. But from a prosecutor's standpoint, is that strong enough?
After conducting the interview of Edwards, which was digitally recorded, I went back to see if maybe there was something he said that I didn't pick up on, or maybe There were certain movements he made to tell me when he was lying.
Her boyfriend.
As I'm watching the video, something struck me. There was a comment that he made when nobody was speaking with him, and it was myself and Detective Sergeant Brian Nunn in the room. He said something sort of under his breath.
We probably rewound it, 1,000 times, trying to make sure that we heard what we heard. I can remember exactly where I was when I heard that recording.
He thought it was under his breath, or maybe it was subconsciously that he said it, but he clearly wasn't saying it out loud. It was quietly said. And after listening to it repeatedly and having many others listen to it repeatedly, everyone agreed that what he said is, "Damn it, I killed her."
To hear him say, "Damn it, I killed her." It's a goosebump moment. Rarely do you have someone who's committed a double homicide actually admit what they did, and that took away any possibility that he would not be found guilty.
We got him. We got our guy. Ultimately, he pleads guilty to killing Tim and Kelly. We don't know why he confessed. He had been playing the game of cat and mouse for many years. But I was happy to see that the two families did get closure.
It was over. That feeling of it's over.
Ed Edwards returns to Wisconsin to face justice for the murders of Tim Heck and Kelly Drew. But as his health fails, he reveals a 33-year secret to the cold case detectives.
While Edwards is in the infirmary in Wisconsin, he begins sending letters to a detective in Ohio regarding two other young people that he had murdered, Billy Lavaco and Judith Straub. His goal is to return to Ohio and get the death penalty for killing them.
Edwards wants to maintain control over his life, over his trajectory, and he will say anything and do anything when the opportunity presents itself to maintain that control.
He's again trying to manipulate the system and control, his future. But he doesn't know that there was a chunk of time that went over the Lavaco and Straub homicides where the death penalty did not apply. So once he realizes that, Edwards confesses to killing his foster son, Danny.
I felt bad, but apparently not bad enough that I kept from doing it.
And that's the case that is death penalty eligible. We don't generally, in prosecution circles, give defendants what they want, but it's going to solve 5 homicides now.
There are people working in law enforcement who do believe that Edwards committed many more murders than he confessed to.
Edwards was an over-the-road truck driver that traveled to California in the late 60s. Because of this, some people believe Edward Wayne Edwards is the Zodiac Killer. Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in Northern California in 1968 and 1969.
Some of the links include the fact that Edwards was a drifter and he could have been in California at this time, the fact that Edwards killed couples, and that the Zodiac Killer also killed couples.
Symbols that are used to sign off on the Zodiac letters consist of 13 symbols. Edward Edwards is 13 letters, and his birth name of Charles Murray is 13 letters as well.
The more trouble you get into, the bigger you are. This is why I was out there committing the crime, was for the recognition.
it definitely was the highlight of my career to get somebody like that, especially for the families, to get this done and to put a bad person behind bars.
Ed Edwards was held accountable for what he did, and he had to admit what he had done. And I think that, really brings me some peace.
Tim and Kelly's death made us realize that there are terrible things in the world, and you have to appreciate every day and what we have.
I think Tim was a son that a lot of fathers would have liked to have.
And we'll never know what may have been, but we don't want Tim and Kelly forgotten.
Zelphia went to her grave knowing a lot about a lot of people.
Two people, the same family, the same year, too much there to be coincidence.
We live in fear. We had two family members missing. Who was going to be next?
Started to locate the first bone.
You just got a cold feeling.
Could this be the unknown crime scene we've been looking for all these years?
When an investigation runs out of leads, it becomes a cold case. Years pass, and hope fades. But for the families of the victims, these cases are never cold. The truth takes time. In the deep woods of Appalachia, nothing is what it seems. When her sister disappears, Reba is desperate for answers. Meanwhile, a detective spends decades determined to uncover the one thing he knows might close the case: the crime scene.
When Zelphia was born, I was just so excited because she was born a day after my birthday. I was 10 years old. I made her bottles. I changed her diapers. She was just like my real life baby doll. She loved writing poems, and she loved unicorns. She collected them. She could get down to like a child's level, always, wanting to joke and play and just have fun. Everybody's kids loved her so much.
She was my favorite aunt. I loved her with all my heart. I really think I loved her more than I loved my parents at times. I myself had an amazing bond with her, but it was nothing like Jeremiah's.
Jeremiah was Zelphia's nephew. He was a very quiet person. He hardly ever would talk much to anybody. They were sort of like brother and sister because they were so close to each other.
Jeremiah was raised in some pretty rough circumstances. His father, Eddie, was gone quite a bit, and I think it was a neglectful relationship.
There was one time Zelphia and Jeremiah witnessed something really bad. They were parked at Eddie's girlfriend's house. Eddie comes and tells them to leave. Then, right after they leave, he burns the house down. Zelphia and Jeremiah, they didn't go to no authorities or nothing like that. They just kept it quiet, told a few family members, and that was it. My brother had been coming back to Marion, and he seen Jeremiah's truck on the side of the interstate. Jeremiah was living with his friends at the time. The boys that he was staying with said that he left and went to his daddy's. And that was the last time he was ever seen.
Jeremiah was missing, but there was no real evidence of a crime. There was not a lot of concern on the part of the investigators at the time. They'd heard rumors that Jeremiah had probably gotten in a truck with a truck driver and gone somewhere to Texas. They had hoped he was somewhere where he wanted to be, on a beach in Mexico, enjoying the sunshine.
Zelphia knows he did not leave town.
Zelphia had come to my house, and she was just really upset. She said Jeremiah would not have left without telling her. And she goes, I want to tell you about a dream that I had last night. She dreamed that Jeremiah's own daddy, Eddie Pittman, had killed Jeremiah. And had buried him. And put lime on him. It made my heart beat so fast. And she told me she was going to confront him, and I begged her to not confront him because I was scared for her life. She wasn't going to stop till she found out what happened to Jeremiah. She was not going to stop. Zelphia was a waitress. She worked at the truck stop, which was just a little ways down the road from her house. Zelphia would walk to work back home sometimes, if somebody didn't give her a ride. One day, Zelphia didn't come home after work. I filed a missing persons report. The sheriff's department didn't believe us.
Law enforcement at the time felt that she's not missing, she's just gone because she wanted to be gone. Zelphia was pretty much a free spirit. She liked to have a good time. It wasn't that unusual for her to decide that she was going to be gone for 2 or 3 days.
We had 2 family members missing. They was making every excuse in the world they could to keep from looking for Jeremiah and Zelphia. Everybody in that sheriff's office was awful. You could walk in and they looked at you like you was trash. Like, we wasn't worthy. One time, they told me to go do my own investigation to get rid of me. I go to the truck stop and I start asking questions. Nobody wanted to talk to me about it. I tried everything that I could. I wanted to know what happened. I wanted it for her. I wanted it for us, my family.
There were some hunters out in a remote area of our county around Lake James who ran across the remains. There were some fragments of hair and some tissue adhering to some of the bones, but the remains were skeletonized almost completely. There wasn't any type of burial or real concealment. It appeared like that the body was just left on top of the ground, and there had been some animal activity. There was also a sheet and a towel and some clothing that was identified as Zilphia's.
I knew it was her. I could feel it before they even confirmed that it was her.
She had suffered severe trauma to the head. Her skull was almost crushed completely. Her remains had been dumped there. There was another crime scene somewhere. They just did not know where that was.
Since Zilphia's remains were found, then they have to take it serious. They have to investigate.
All of a sudden, law enforcement says it's time to pursue this thing. Now we have a murder. Marion is a rural community at Appalachian foothills. The mountains have their own kind of culture, with our share of problems as well. I took an interest in the Lowry case early on. I was working in a small town in the neighboring county. I heard that there had been a body found. The first day I came to work, there was a case file left on the desk of one of the investigators, and that was Zilphia's case file. I've always been one that likes a challenge, and so I approached the detective captain and asked him, "Do you mind if I pick up that file and take a look at it?" He looked at me and he said, "Get it, take it, solve it." The scene where Zilphia's remains were recovered is certainly one crime scene that we had. If we can locate that second crime scene, that's probably where we're going to find our murderer. At the same time I was going through that file, I was trying to digest the Jeremiah Pittman file. We had two people in the same family, in the same year, go missing. One of them turns up dead, one of them still missing. These cases either have to be related or it is a real coincidence. When you're taking on a case, you have to pick up the ball from where it is. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose because there's so much information and it's coming at you like crazy. First, we needed to go back and talk to people at the last place Zilphia was seen, the truck stop. One of the individuals who discussed last seeing Zilphia said that she got in the car with someone, but nobody knew who he was, where they were going, We needed to try to get some more information. I visited the McDowell County Jail. Jails can become somewhat of a rumor mill. There were people who, for one reason or another, wanted to interject themselves into this case. One individual talked about being with some guys when they had taken a blonde-haired girl wrapped up in a sleeping bag, carried her out in the woods, and left her there. Another guy claimed that he had been asked by a drug dealer to take this girl away because she had been killed. I heard 11 or 12 different versions of what happened to Zephyr. It was kind of a moving target, so to speak. I arranged a sit down with several of the family members to see what information they might be able to give.
We were so desperate to try to find out something. I was just happy that there was someone to listen and try to help. We had 2 family members missing, Zelphia and Jeremiah. To me, all signs pointed to one person, Jeremiah's daddy, Eddie Pittman. I told Detective Green about Zelphia's dream. Zelphia just knew that dream was telling her Eddie had killed Jeremiah. If he killed Jeremiah, he could kill her too.
Reba described a dream. From an investigator's standpoint, we have to deal in terms of evidence that we have, and dreams or visions are not evidence.
So I said, okay, I really thought that Eddie did it, and I'll tell you why. Zelphia and Jeremiah witnessed Eddie burning the house down for his girlfriend, Rosemary, so she can get insurance money.
If Eddie burned Rosemary's house and they had witnessed that could be a possible motive for murder. We felt like we had enough information to talk to Eddie. Ed was in denial of having anything to do with Jeremiah's disappearance, and he was in total denial about Zelphia, doesn't know anything about her murder. We've got to do something with this lead here. We've got to be able to develop it further or eliminate it. And so we just keep working at it over the next several months. One day, the chief deputy came back to my office and he looked at me and he said, Rosemary Gering's in the lobby, wants to talk to you. And I looked at him, I said, what about? And he said, I don't know. She was led back to my office and came in and she had a concerned look on her face. And I'm like, Rosemary, how can I help you today? And she said, well, I wanted to come see you. I think Eddie's going to kill me. Why do you think Eddie would want to kill you? And she said, because of what I could say. When Rosemary walked in my office that day, the last thing I thought I'd be doing would be driving her around while she's pointing where to go. She had said, I think Eddie Pittman is going to kill me because of what I know. We ride down to this real remote area. All of a sudden, she stops. She walks over to a ditch, points in the ditch, and she says, it's right there. Start digging. spent quite a bit of time digging. We weren't finding anything. She walked over to the ditch. She said, "You're in the right place, but you're not deep enough." Continued to dig and started to locate the first bone. Exactly where she pinpointed is where Jeremiah's remains were found. Your heart's jumping through your chest. And so she began to tell the story of witnessing a confrontation between Ed and Jeremiah, where Jeremiah ended up dead. Eddie picked up a hammer so he could finish Jeremiah off. They had taken Jeremiah's truck and abandoned it out on the interstate. Rosemary had gone with him to dispose of the body. Part of what they did in disposing of him was to pour the lime in the hole.
And Zelphia's nightmare came true. Her dream was given to her for a reason.
Zelphia knew where Jeremiah was. She knew exactly where he was.
Whoa, this is not just some abstract dream. This is real. Blunt force injury to the head. It's just like Zelphia's murder.
Ed Pittman, for heaven's sakes, killed his own son. Killed him the same way Zelphia was killed. In the same county. During the same year.
There's too much there to be coincidence.
Was it actually a dream? We don't know. But she knew what happened to Jeremiah.
We went to Ed's house. A number of us went out there, not knowing what Eddie might be capable of. He advised Eddie that we had a warrant for his arrest and that he was under arrest for murder. And I'll never forget the reaction Eddie gave me. He said, "Whose murder?" Now we're really convinced Eddie could have killed Zelphia. I said, "Let me ask you a question. What happened to Zelphia?" He hadn't seen her and he didn't know anything about her.
Eddie don't confess to nothing.
We haven't found any evidence to connect Ed to Zelphia. Nothing solid. We've got her body. That's all we have.
He was charged with Jeremiah's murder. He pled guilty and there was a plea agreement to manslaughter.
I really thought that Eddie did it. That he got rid of Zelphia because of her suspicions of him. I think Eddie Pittman got away with my sister's murder.
I think the family thought that Eddie could have killed Zelphia, but we're not finding anything. Sure, there's a lot of speculation, some suspicious circumstances, but nothing you can really hang your hat on. I started to think that Eddie Pittman had nothing to do with it. The longer a case goes, the less likely they are to be solved. You know that statistically. With Zelphia, you don't have suspects. You don't have a direction to go. You don't have really any indication of what happened. The case was cold, very cold.
All those years, not knowing, not hearing nothing. I didn't know who killed her, but I knew somebody in that town knew something.
10-year anniversary of Sylvia's murder. Detective Green gets a story to run in the local paper. He hopes the story might spark a confession.
Was trying to pull at some heartstrings there. Emotions can be a strong motivator for somebody to talk. We were approached by a prisoner in jail. His name was Ricky. He gives us a name, Ronald. Ricky thinks that Ronald may have been involved in Zylvia's death. Several years ago, Ronald had shown up in a van with a fairly significant blood stain shortly after Zylvia's disappearance. We are cautiously optimistic that this may be the break we've been looking for. And so we'll begin trying to find that van. We found the van. We ultimately ended up finding it in a junkyard. It had been there for a long time. There were some stains in that van that appeared like they could be blood stains. There's a chemical called phenolphthalein, which is a test for the presence of blood. And when phenolphthalein reacts with blood, it turns a bright pink color. They were not blood stains. And so Ronald's van was not the crime scene. But Zylvia's family came to us with a suggestion that we might want to talk with Ronald.
Ronald was friends with my son. One day, Ronald had told my son that he knows what happened to my sister.
I remember sitting down with Ronald, and pretty much one of the first things that Ronald comes with was, I can tell you what happened to Zylvia. Ronald said that at the time that Zylvia disappeared, there were two guys who lived in a mobile home near a friend of Ronald's. Ronald said that his friends had gone over there one night to ask him to turn some music down, and that they was real suspicious the way they'd answered the door and wouldn't let anybody in. And then later that night, Ronald's friends actually saw two guys moving something that looked like a rolled up carpet or something to that nature. Ronald said that maybe he's hauling her body. The first reaction is, could this be real? The story that Ronald was telling us could have just been a smokescreen to throw us in another direction. Yet at the same time, he had given a pretty good description of where that trailer was. We made a decision to try to find that trailer. You know, it's been 11 or 12 years. Is the trailer even still there? Well, Dudley went out to the area that Ronald had described. I found the landlady. She walked over, pointed out the trailer. Here it is. It was an abandoned old single-wide trailer. And she confirmed that, back around 1993, there was a guy that had lived at that mobile home. And she gave us the last name of Whited, Robin Whited. At that point, I got a cold feeling. Animals had been in the trailer. Just the sheer cold feeling that I got. Strange, very strange. I don't know. I almost wondered. It almost had that feeling about it. I don't know. Could this really be where Zelpha was murdered? Could this be the unknown crime scene we've been looking for all these years? It was our crime scene, but we had a name. This guy, Robin, might be able to give us some answers. The landlord told us that Robin had moved back to what she thought was Richmond's Virginia area. We went to Virginia, seeing if we could locate this Robin and have a conversation with him. I was able to locate where Robin was, working at a car dealership. He was very polite and acknowledged almost right away that, yeah, they had partied with some girl and she had a strange name. I mentioned the name Zelphia, and he said, yeah, that sounds right. Showed him a picture of Zelphia, and he acknowledged that, yeah, that's the girl that he had partied with. He remembers this blonde-haired girl coming over to party one night, that he had had sex with her, but the next morning she was gone. He did not know when she left exactly. And he had no knowledge or clue that she had met with any kind of foul play. If he'd said, I don't know what you're talking about, don't know this girl, never saw her before, we basically would have shut us down again and we would have come back empty-handed. But now we have direct information that places Zelphia at that trailer, and now we're walking away with a suspect. We really didn't have any physical evidence against Robin. But because of what Robin had said, we're even more convinced that the trailer is where Zelphia was murdered. We knew Zelphia had died from extensive blunt force trauma. The medical examiner told us we likely had a bloody crime scene. So we had hoped, best case scenario, we might be able to find some blood, even after all these years. It had been somewhat open to the elements, so we knew we were up against some pretty staggering odds. It was the ultimate Hail Mary pass. Myself and the other detectives were taking swabs of any place and every place that blood spatter might still be. Not likely, but you always have that hope. After several hours, every one of us was just drenched with sweat, but we weren't finding anything. At this point, he'd probably done 150 swabs. Sometimes you see something that you didn't see before. I knew that flies are naturally attracted to blood, and flies constantly excrete and regurgitate. Whatever they get into, they're leaving traces of that somewhere. I was looking up at the bathroom ceiling and saw these dozen or so little brown specks. I'm thinking it might be fly speck. So I climbed up on the edge of the tub and just swabbed the specks and handed those down for analysis. All of a sudden, one of those swabs, it lights up brilliantly. Yes, this is what we've been looking for. I mean, there were some high fives went up. Happy as we were, that still didn't say whether this was Zilphia's blood. We did not have anything to compare a sample with, because in 1994, when Zilphia's remains were found, DNA wasn't as prevalent a science. And so there was no sample of her DNA that was preserved. Where do we go from here?
I knew we had to do it in order to get her DNA.
When you reach out to a family and say, we're headed down this road as an investigator, that's not something you take lightly.
I told them to do what they needed to do. And they wanted to know if I wanted to be there when she was exhumed. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't rebury her.
It's something that needs to be done with dignity and respect. And yet at the same time, you're on a search for evidence.
Since it was just bones, they put all of her bones in a little baby casket. And that's how we buried her.
I never will forget the look on my son's face when I went home that day, and I went home to change clothes. He asked me why I got so dirty. And, explained to him, he knows what Daddy does for a living, but yet didn't necessarily think about his dad going digging up a grave, That's one of those things that stay with you. But it was a pretty good day when that lab report came back.
I was crying. I was saying, oh my God, the DNA matched in that trailer.
That's when you know you're on the right road. There's no doubt there.
We're going to get these guys. We're going to get them.
Detective Shook and Detective Green came into the district attorney's office, and what they told me was that they had a suspect, Robin White. And now I've got a piece of physical evidence I can take to the jury. This is a circumstantial case. We're building it brick by brick by brick by brick.
Robin, I'm just going to ask you about the death of Zilphia Lowry.
I came into work that evening. Bobby and the girl's not around her. And sitting in the car here, open party.
Who you say Bobby? Bobby Taylor.
Yes.
Okay. Robin was able to give us a name, and that was Bobby Taylor. Bobby has an extensive criminal record with some violent offenses on his rap sheet.
Robin was having sex with Zilpha. Bobby wanted his turn. But Zilpha doesn't want any part of Bobby Taylor. Bobby Taylor becomes angry with Zilpha, then slams Zilpha's head into the floor several times.
Robin said that he had personally witnessed Bobby beat her to death. We've got an eyewitness to a murder. Robin was charged as an accessory. We found out where Bobby is. Bobby's in federal prison. Bobby remembered this blonde-haired girl had come over to his trailer and partied one night, but his story was that when he had last seen her, she was alive and well. So we started confronting him with some of the things that Robin said. And Bobby pretty well shut down. And I said, Bobby, I've been doing this for 25 years. And he looked at me and he said, what you don't understand is I've been doing this for 25 years. And he was sitting in prison at the time. He was no stranger to trouble. This was something that Bobby was kind of accustomed to.
Before the trial of Robert Taylor, Robin comes down for an interview and brings with him a videotape.
This is the videotape Robin White had made along about the time of Zelphia's disappearance.
As the trial progresses, we played this videotape for the jury. It's the crime scene as it was 13 years ago. At one point, he zeroed in on the bathroom where Zilpha died. Argued to the jury that Robin knows what happened, that he has a guilty conscience of it, that he did what Bobby Taylor told him to do because he was scared of Bobby Taylor, that his guilty conscience made him this videotape. The jury has reached a verdict. Then the judge has Bobby Taylor stand up.
When he got it, he looked and stared. Each one of the family members was sitting on the seats and smiled this smirky smile at us. He had the devil in his eyes. I seen the devils in his eyes.
When we were able to bring this case together, I felt like it was the answer to a lot of prayers. Mine too.
Greene and the McDowell County Sheriff's Department finally deliver justice as Bobby Taylor is imprisoned for the murder of Zelphia. After 15 years, Zelphia's family finally has the truth.